Welcome back, everybody. This is the AIX Higher Ed Podcast update for October 29th, and a lot going on this week.
Yeah, of course, titled it structural, but just kind of, big things to look at across the board. Yesterday, OpenAI and Microsoft, they resolved a lot of things, and the other one thing was related to another in terms of the structure of the organization. So the first thing, just the structure of the organization, OpenAI there's now basically two components, right? There's the for-profit corporation, which is a public benefit corporation now, which a public benefit corporation is just a corporation that has a benefit, to the public and, beyond, it has a purpose beyond making money for the investors, right? So it has these two purposes, but it's a for-profit benefit corporation. Then the nonprofit structure was also retained. It's going to be a separate corporation, but it has oversight actually still over the public benefit corporation. And of course, they're saying, oh, we've infused a lot of money into the nonprofit. It's one of the most, well capitalized nonprofits. You don't usually talk about that way. So, that's important. And then Microsoft and OpenAI kind of worked out, some of the disagreements they were having about what percentage. I think they went from about 33% to 27%. Ownership. And, there was a controversy because it originally said, well, if AGI is achieved, then Microsoft loses its ownership interest. But they resolved that at least it would have to be verified by outside experts, not just asserted by OpenAI. And they still have a lot of protection of the intellectual property. And there's some target dates in there. So the big thing I think is kind of resolving these things will allow OpenAI to take on even more investors that they had, because even some of the investment deals like with SoftBank in Japan, they were dependent, excuse me, on OpenAI resolving, these, kind of issues with Microsoft and how they were going to operate. Because obviously, if somebody's going to invest billions of dollars, or even hundreds of billions of dollars, into an enterprise, they want to know that they can make a profit.
There are a lot of people writing about this, so you'll be able to see other stories that get into the financial specifics. I think the other takeaway for all of us to consider when we're thinking about educational spaces is that OpenAI clearly has a for-profit business, and there are a lot of concerns of people writing about that profit motive, then perhaps changing the way that they're implementing, or perhaps really raising questions about what they're doing with some of their technology. Keep following this. The question about AGI and determination will be an interesting one. But there's a lot being said. The other aspect of this that we probably didn't mention yet is that there's every indication that OpenAI will then go to an IPO, initial public offering, and it'll be publicly traded probably in the next year or so. And this follows along with similar stories about Sam Altman saying that OpenAI wants to get to $1 trillion a year in infrastructure spend. And they've even included in this deal with Microsoft $250 billion worth of Azure work that they'll work on with Microsoft. And they're continuing to work on deals like this. Then also this story about how OpenAI is looking to re-industrialize the US. They're certainly not short on ambition. And Sam Altman is one of the biggest deal makers I think private industry has ever seen. And it's astonishing to see where they're going with this. Certainly feeds into the discussions we've had about what this means for the economy, for jobs, disruption, and industrial policy as well.
And it's not just OpenAI, right? We also see Anthropic signing a multi-billion-dollar deal to expand the use of Google's TPUs, tensor processing units. It just work a bit differently than the GPUs, but the same kind of purpose of processing the data in quickly in a way that can be used in an AI system. So everybody is seeking essentially more compute, more infrastructure, and it's not just limited to to data infrastructure.
The other thing that's interesting about this with Anthropic making this deal is that Google has only used their TPUs for their own processing before. This offers new entry for Google into the field of providing their processing units for others to use, perhaps even selling them for others, and certainly being able to sell compute power.
And like I said, it's not just about the compute power. In order to have the compute power, you have to have energy. The United States government just entered into a huge deal to use Westinghouse nuclear reactor technology. They're supporting all this. That they're backing it financially. It's an $80 billion deal. It's just kind of it's an enormous commitment. And we see, there's a new AI, OpenAI released yesterday, seizing the AI opportunity, which kind of outlines, the agreement that we talked about earlier, the commitment to building out, more data processing centers to build out AI energy use. And if you flip to the next slide, I also think something important here, right, is that if you look in the third paragraph, it's like we're preparing today's workers for tomorrow's jobs through our OpenAI certification program in jobs platforms, which create new pathways into skilled trades and technology roles with strong wages and portable credentials. Two things here. One, we're seeing, in terms of people being worried about jobs, and we're going to talk more about jobs later than even we normally do. These are high demand areas where we're still going to see a lot of human role in energy. They say electricians, and in construction, right, where it's going to be a while till we can roboticize everything. But second, I think, and more importantly, especially for higher ed, to think about is they're kind of jumping into this educational space. Part of it, people say, well, they want to make some money on education. It's multi-trillion-dollar market, which makes sense, but also, I think they kind of fear that otherwise they're not going to get the workers they need. That students graduating kind of from quote unquote traditional universities, there aren't enough of them being trained in the actual new jobs into the workforce that they're going to need to build out all this infrastructure and essentially create an AI world. And is has been said on this podcast before, and by Adam Paxton, I think specifically was the first person we interviewed. If universities don't kind of step up and start training students, and even K-12 institutions and the jobs that are going to actually be needed, then they're going to get cut out of the picture. And, the AI companies will provide it one way or the other.
Certainly nothing slowing down. As we talk about an AI bubble, you hear that in a lot of quarters, and there are a lot of indications that our entire economy is one big bet on AI, and OpenAI is ready to take that bet. Now, moving on to some tool development. First, starting off with company knowledge, a new feature for ChatGPT. They're expanding their enterprise role, and I think they certainly see a threat coming from Anthropic, or at least a lot of competition from Anthropic, who's become a big player in enterprise use of AI. This function of company knowledge is really important to be able to share a lot of the materials and the data and the documents they would have within a company. Adding this to memory then just gives you a lot of other capabilities in terms of what you're able to do with the platform.
Claude added a lot of financial tools. It's not my area of expertise, but I've tried to use Excel and I can use it a little bit. But so this is something that would help me a lot. I mean, it basically just kind of allows you to communicate with Excel and other financial tools, just through basic text prompting or even voice. And they've added a lot of other things for people, market data for people in finance, like Moody's and PitchBook. And Palantir, things I don't use, but I know what they are. So I would imagine that they're very useful. So we're seeing Claude integrate some additional tools.
This integration is really important. If you haven't played around with Claude lately and you have access to the $20 a month account, I found they've integrated tools so seamlessly that even when you're asking a query, it'll produce it as a file that you can download, Word document, PowerPoint, Excel spreadsheet, a PDF, that gives you just an easier way of being able to incorporate it in your workflow. And we'll see a lot more of that, I think. Adobe, of course, is building out. There were a lot of questions before about whether or not AI was going to be a threat to Adobe. And I heard one analyst talking a bit about how really they have this moat because they have a lot of content that is already meets copyright concerns and provides protections for a lot of creatives. And they have a number of tools that people are already subscribing to by adding in chat-based assistants into Photoshop and Express and Firefly. It just helps widen that moat a little bit and gives them more time to be able to compete against other platforms. So it really interesting to see that AI assistant in Photoshop is being rolled out. That's something that's going to prolong their capabilities. Now, moving on to economy and adoption. And I'll let Stefan talk a little bit about this new Wharton report, full report about Gen AI fast tracks into the enterprise.
Yeah, this just came out yesterday, and there was this earlier study that said, oh, 90, I think it was 90% of attempted business adoptions fail, and it really wasn't the best study. It was, it was obviously using an older AI, but more importantly, it was just they surveyed some people about some projects at a conference. I think there were like 50 surveys. It was a very limited data set, and sometimes you can tell these surveys are conducted by people with an agenda, right? So but a lot of people reacted that, and that was kind of part of the like, oh, like AI is like not gonna, this is all hype, it's all gonna die out. We're ever committed. But when you actually look at, this new study came out by, I think, three, or at least led by three Penn professors in the business school, looked at a lot of industries and a lot of different types of industries and different uses, and they're seeing really widespread adoption. If you flip onto onto the next slide, this was just like, okay, where is it being used, right? And you can see that the expertise is growing a lot, right? It's not growing as fast as in marketing and management, but in purchasing and procurement, finance and accounting, legal. You see really an explosion of legal use. In fact, I saw just on LinkedIn, someone that's connected to on LinkedIn, they worked at a Harvey AI, which is probably the biggest supplier of kind of legal AI, and they're just like, look, we're experiencing explosive growth. We're opening these offices all over the world, and if you if you know me and you're interested and you work hard, we need people who work super hard. But there's just kind of explosion of growth there, and it hasn't. I think marketing, we'll see a lot more. That's a pretty strong use case, but you just kind of see this explosion of use when you really kind of look at data at a broad level. And it's also kind of showing, in the same kind of areas, how much it's helping productivity, right? So we don't see it really, at least compared to previous years, it's not increasing productivity that much. But in HR, IT, purchasing, in accounting, legal, wow, explosion in productivity. So when you look at particular sectors, you're seeing explosive use, explosive productivity gains, and you're seeing productivity gains across the board. And just on that last slide, it's just like, people went from just kind of playing around with it, just where you didn't, maybe see as many gains in the productivity, but now they're actually using it, and it's increasing the productivity.
And that moves us into self-improvement and generalization as we're thinking about some of the tools. And this new report about multi-agent evolution, LLM self-improvement through coevolution. We've talked before about recursive self-improvement and looking at this within multi-agent systems. They're continuing to chip away at this, and especially thinking about this in terms of reasoning capabilities. Lots of developments, and it's continuing to move in this direction.
Yeah, and the same thing here we've seen, is especially but this talks about self-improving, especially in the area of generalization. We're starting to see a little bit of generalization from one domain to the other, and I think you expressed it really well, right? Kind of starting to nibble and push out in this area. We're obviously not there; no one's claiming that, but there's a lot of kind of papers and that are showing the kind of capability, and including, right, one with more a greater use of the AI scientist that works with humans, right? So we're still, and this can be underestimated too. I think a lot of it, because a lot of the talk is almost like a little bit overclaimed, like, that the agents are just kind of fully autonomous, and people say, well, they're not really fully autonomous. And then people are discounting, okay, but when you use it, right, with a human, that's really the stage we're in right now. We're seeing explosive gains in, science and math, and, it just can't be discounted.
It's the integration into work processes that I think is really important to recognize. And we see this from individuals. You find that people are starting to find specific use cases. They're thinking about how it's being used, and it's certainly very intentional, but it's now becoming ambient, as Stefan has talked about before. And we're just getting used to it. And that's continuing in the enterprise setting as well.
Yeah, this last one I just thought was funny. It kind of piqued my interest, and then I went and looked at the study, and you're showing how that LLMs are maybe even more curious than people, right? We're always kind of comparing these kind of like, human traits that we think are so unique, but it does see the LLMs always are very curious and want to learn.
Now, thinking about public acceptance, this is a really important part of this too, as we're thinking about integration and rolling out in different sectors. There are really concerns about, this generative AI boom and evidence from this survey looking at reduced AI acceptance. I think we should be expecting some of this on some level when we had just kind of low rates of understanding or awareness. And as people are becoming more aware, they're going to start raising concerns and thinking about what that acceptance might look like. And so we'll see more studies like this. It'll be interesting to see how those people that are using it day to day, how that might compare to people that aren't using it, but are concerned about some of the other political and societal implications as we think about how AI gets integrated into the rest of society.
Yeah, I mean, if you lose your job or a big data center moves into your neighborhood, it's going to cause some concern. In terms of robots, we don't have as many updates this week, but there's a couple things I thought were interesting. Runway produces, synthetic AI video, and they're partnering to fine-tune their generative video models for specific use cases like robotics, education, life sciences, and architecture. And it's not just like building robots to do those things, but they can help advance robotics because they can create simulations that with the video, with the synthetic video, that the robots can train on, right? So it used to be like, well, the robots had to watch somebody in their kitchen, right? Or now Runway can create all these simulations that the robotics companies can train on, and that's one of the reasons we're seeing such quick advances in robotics. And even here, and it's not just kind of the advances, it's the accessibility. If you kind of flip to I think it's the next slide here, a Chinese robotics startup, they're putting out a family-friendly $1,400 robot. That's pretty cool. I mean, these phones these days, right? New iPhone like 12, $1,400. And we're constantly kind of upgrading. And now you can get a robot for the same amount. It may not have all the capabilities of your iPhones. It's a brand new thing, but we're going to start to see widespread humanoid robotics.
Yeah. The other thing that's important about this is that you saw different developments in areas of AI, synthetic video, imaging, and it kind of just looked like a parlor trick. It's like, okay, well, that's cute. That seems nice, but I'm not really sure what you'd be able to do with it. We're starting to see the integration across platforms and the use of really creative use of different AI tools with other AI tools. And that's what allows for really explosive growth and application. And robotics is a perfect example of that.
And to think
Elon, I was going to say, but I'll let you talk about this one, Stefan. Elon Musk, of course, in the news, as always.
He wants, and he's kind of known for hyping things a little bit, but I mean, we are going to have robots, and he does have a lot of data, right? He has all of X, he has all the data from all his Teslas, and everything he's training Grok on right now, right? And he's building out robotics, and I'm sure he's going to have some very advanced robotic systems. And he says he's building a robot army, and it might be a workforce army. It's definitely going to be in the military. We're already starting to see these applications, and I think he's worth around like $400 billion right now. But he kind of basically wants a commitment to be paid $1 trillion, I think, if his companies generate $1 trillion in revenue. And of course, he wants control over this, or strong influence, he says, over this robot army, which, if you think about it, a robot army is going to be arguably more powerful than a human army. Right. So it's like, well, for better or worse, the government and the commander in chief kind of control the human armies of the largest armies in the world, which is definitely at least military power wise is the United States. So what does it mean for him as kind of a private citizen who couldn't survive in government for more than about 2 months to have strong influence over how this robot army is used?
Now, a couple of things to take as one as a grain of salt is that the Optimus robotic program, one of the leaders of that program, left Tesla and actually made it clear took a pay cut to go to another company because they were really not happy that there were a lot of cuts happening with Optimus. I'm not sure that they'll be building this robot army as soon as Elon Musk was hoping to. So that might be delayed a little bit. I think part of this is also posturing, which he's very good at doing to be able to increase the value of his stock. But this idea of getting $1 trillion of payment is really not that far fetched because I think it's something along the lines of if the company increases by $4 or $5 trillion in terms of value or sales, then he would get that $1 trillion. So that's maybe not that out of line if he's able to get there. But this suggestion of control of a robot army is certainly provocative.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw this morning Nvidia's hit 5 trillion, right? So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. I mean,
possible.
there are a lot of companies that are now three companies that have hit 4 trillion, Microsoft and Apple joining Nvidia. Now, looking at universities, Virginia Tech, their working group just came out with their final AI framework report, and that was released. This is one that was certainly shared at our university and across the Commonwealth and across the country. Virginia Tech, of course, is very well positioned with its computer science program and with a lot of the tech background that they have to be able to develop these governance structures, principles for responsible AI, integrating it across all university functions. It's more than just thinking about it in terms of study, but also thinking about how they'll integrate this across the university.
And UCL, they partnered with Google DeepMind to create a new curriculum. These companies are getting involved just to it's an AI curriculum to democratize access. So I think universities are really, they're you're seeing more and more efforts. Nobody has all the answers, but more and more efforts to do things. And there's more studies, new thinking, right? Like, I think almost everyone agrees now. I think some people are still in denial, so I say almost that there we basically have widespread use of AI by students, right? Whether it's as a study buddy, so to speak, or it's to help them complete their work, maybe, right? Maybe whether they're offloading it or engaging it, we know usage is widespread. So then it does kind of bring up the question, right? Is this going to help them get better, or is this going to undermine their thinking? And as we both know, it really depends on how they use it. And I think this has got to become a fundamental question, not just for universities, but education at large, at least above the elementary school level. Well, how are we facilitating student use of AI in a way that has the best chance of enhancing their learning and preparing them for the AI world?
That window of opportunity to be able to guide students' use and be able to provide that AI literacy, that window is starting to close because we're seeing widespread adoption and use, not just by students, but by faculty and parents and across society. It's important that we start acting now.
And somebody, this is related to that. They kind of said, "Oh, everything is television." They said that AI has kind of given us more time to do things. Like a lot of people are using it to get their work done faster and maybe even a little bit better. But what are they doing? They're spending it on social media or watching TV. That we haven't really necessarily diverted the time we are saving to the most productive things. And then maybe taking longer to do those productive things, you're at least like exercising your mind. Whereas now you're just kind of watching television and, broadly defined and bringing it under there. And then, K-12, I mean, you can say these issues are related. I think a lot of schools are realizing that, if you give a student a traditional homework assignment, right, like, the work on a paper or a worksheet or whatever, right, that they can do it all with AI and pretty accurately at this point, right? It's still going to make some mistakes, but it's going to get it done. So, do we not, want to give homework anymore? I mean, we talked about this, and then the fall of 23 about flipped classrooms and all these types of things, but other people are just catching up to this a little bit 2 years later. More people should listen to us because we always do. We always kind of we kind of hit we're about 2 years ahead sometimes. And but yeah, I mean
But I
it's
mean, this is an issue that it's not even
right,
just about AI. There have been
right.
questions about the role of homework for years, and a lot of other educational systems that have gotten rid of homework in the way we traditionally think of it. There are better ways to engage students and to be able to help them move forward in their work than just having them fill out a bunch of worksheets. So it's not just about keeping them busy, something about maybe motivating them and getting them to work forward. AI is just being able to bring to the front a lot of these issues that we should have been grappling with for the last several decades. Now, moving on to challenges, and starting off with this first about thinking about a job apocalypse and what this means. There's big news this week from Amazon, two reports, actually, one of them talking about how they're thinking about and thinking plans to be able to incorporate more robotics in a lot of the fulfillment work that they're doing. And so that's something that they haven't been able to institute yet, but they're certainly planning towards. And they've invested a great deal in robotics, and they've already done this on some level. They're planning on ramping that up. But they've also announced yesterday cutting what was approximately 10%, I think I remember reading, of white collar jobs for Amazon. And other companies are revealing plans to slow hiring and to be able to do this as well. And most analysts are saying it's blaming automation, being able to incorporate greater productivity and efficiencies with AI. All of them are citing AI as a factor. And so we're starting to see this happen. And I think it's just going to speed up as more companies are figuring out how to integrate this, as companies are not finding ways to adjust or move their employees. It's no longer just slowing hiring. Now they're going to start laying off people that they find are redundant.
Yeah, and it mentions here in the second part of this article, which came out today. Now I've seen this more on LinkedIn, and OpenAI is doing this. They're training people for like mid to upper level management in specialized roles, right? So people, this talks about a whole company, a 2-year-old company with a 22-year-old CEO who dropped out of college when he's 20, and they're building this company to replace workers, right? Like accountants, financial analysts. OpenAI is doing this in finance as well. There was an article, they're paying kind of retired people in finance $150 an hour to essentially build out these AI workers. So it's starting to come for upper level jobs. I had seen something podcast a few months ago about aerospace engineers. There's a company, they think within 2 years they'll have entry-level aerospace engineers ready to enter into the workforce. So there are a lot of, some of the big companies and also smaller companies are essentially developing mid to upper level workers. People are making, maybe anywhere between 100 and, $400,000 a year. Their jobs are at risks because, the AIs are going to be able to do them. And this is a couple things you can just kind of flip through these. This was the one about the Amazon. This Kodak one I'll just mention because there was an article about like Kodak, when everything
They-
fell apart because Kodak didn't adapt to the
yeah.
digital age, and all their employees they had like 190,000 employees and they lost their jobs. And they said the same thing's essentially happening to consulting companies because especially, consulting companies charging $500-700 an hour, they're sending out these young workers, recent college graduates who are making like, maybe like $100 an hour. They're making $150,000 a year. But all their work now can be done by AI and even kind of higher level consultants. So they're saying that all these consultants are just going to get wiped out the same way that all the Kodak workers lost their jobs because Kodak didn't adapt.
And the irony of it is the Kodak had developed digital photography early on and then sat on it. And so these global consultants are doing some of the same thing. They're incorporating AI, and by doing that, they're making their own work redundant. Lessons to be learned. This I mentioned before, the story about Amazon hoping to replace 600,000 workers with robots. Certainly, we'll be following this, and they're managing a lot of the PR backlash because of it, and trying to find a way to kind of negotiate that with local communities so that they still incorporate human workers. But of course, they're looking for ways to increase efficiency and productivity.
Yeah, and I want to kind of, so just to kind of end on that, right? We kind of started talking about knowledge workers and higher income people having their jobs replaced. Now we're looking at also job replacement. People working in Amazon warehouse, maybe making $15 or $20 an hour. So it's going to affect broad sectors of society. And I do wish more people would pay attention to this, right? It's again, people are waiting for things to happen until they react to it. And you have some major voices kind of in AI and the economy, Vinod Khosla, he's a billionaire. He's one of the biggest investors in technology companies in the world. He's one of the initial investors in OpenAI, and he's saying like we need radical ideas, right? So he puts on on the table the government, and we've seen a little bit of this with Intel, right? I don't think until the Trump administration we had too much of this, but we're seeing more of it where governments kind of buy into companies, right? And they take on a stake. And he's saying the government should take on a stake in every publicly traded company of around 10% so that they can use that money to support workers when they lose their jobs to AI. He's like, maybe he doesn't call it the jobs apocalypse, right? That article, that headline to get you to click on it, right? Maybe, we'll see how bad it gets, but everyone agrees, even people who think, well, eventually there'll be more jobs into the future. I'm not really so convinced of that. But even if that's true, everyone agrees there's going to be short-term job loss, and we need radical solutions and radical ideas. And, these ideas aren't coming out of academia right now. Academia is focused a lot on whether kids are writing their papers with AI. And, we need some big approaches. And, another thinker, Mustafa, Imad Mustak, excuse me. He ran a hedge fund. I think he started in a hedge fund, then created his own hedge fund, made a lot of money, and then he started Stability AI, and he moved on to this new thing now called the Intelligent Internet. But he released a book in September, which I kind of just got word of, and I started reading, called The Last Economy, and he makes a very strong argument that in the past, first we had automation of labor, and now we have automation of intelligence, and that this is going to lead to a lot of unemployment. And the idea he puts out there is that, he doesn't think universal basic income is going to be enough, that we're not going to be able to generate enough economic activity to support universal basic income, but we could have a universal basic compute where everybody's entitled to a certain amount of compute that you can use to kind of essentially, sell your own products, build your own business, right? It's a little under theorized in the practical side, but it's a great idea, and it's all kind of started how we need to build a new economy with cryptocurrency and all these types of things. But these are two of the people who know more about AI than I'll ever know, right? And that most people who are talking about this are ever going to know, who have been in the industry their entire lives, who have built and invested in some of the biggest companies, right, who have a lot of experience in the financial sector, who are incredibly successful, saying these technologies are going to produce a significant amount of unemployment, and governments need to kind of start thinking about really radical and kind of creative alternatives. And I would extend that to schools, right? We schools, not just universities, but K-12, especially, in the high school level. We really need to start thinking about how we're going to prepare students, not just for the job market, but kind of this emerging reality. There's a lot of things that kind of go with it, but they need to start thinking a little more outside the box, like these two thinkers have. And
This is really the message that I think we all need to recognize. The era of safe corporate careers is fading. And this is a discussion we've been having with students. You can't plan for getting the degree, doing that job, and doing it in the traditional way. Obviously, that's changing already with the current job market, and it's only going to rapidly change further from that. Think about what Ahmad Mustak's theory is about. Giving everybody compute means that people need to be entrepreneurial to be able to drive their own work. And that's a different level of agency than we've ever expected with safe corporate careers in the past. And that's a radically different approach. We aren't preparing students for that adequately.
just one other thing, on the military, right? I always talk about this. We should put the challenges first so we can end on more positive notes. But just how, there's a lot of integration into AI into the military, and China's using some of its own models, DeepSeek and Quen for that as well. And of course, they're really far ahead of the US in robotics. And I saw an article this morning that said that there's now 565 million generative AI users in China, which is, a little bit over. It's about, well, I guess 30% of their population. So that's kind of quite substantial.
And then also concerning with mental health, there are lots of developments here. I saw that Character AI just came out with an announcement that they're going to increase their age limit to 18 for anybody using their platform. We'll get into that probably with next week when we get more details about it. OpenAI is tightening ChatGPT safeguards over mental health conversations. And what's really alarming about this is they've been able to pull back the curtain a little bit to share how many conversations they found people are having with chatbots and on ChatGPT's platform that are alarming, that are concerning regarding mental health. And it looks like a small percentage, like 0.17%, but that ends up being millions of conversations. And this is really just raising to the fore an important conversation that we need to have about providing mental health support, how these models are supposed to assume that role, and if we want them to assume that role, and what kind of restrictions and controls do we want to place as guardrails so that they aren't giving bad advice. And OpenAI is making the case that their newer models of GPT-5 are doing a much better job as analyzed by mental health professionals. Is that going to be enough? The other thing to remember about this is that those are all individuals that many of them, these weren't mental health concerns that are caused by the use of AI. They're just exhibiting them and talking about them in their interactions with generative AI. And so that also, like a lot of these other issues, are problems that we've had in society that we haven't addressed adequately. And we need to have broader, open discussions about what they really mean to us.
Yeah, yeah, and I really want to highlight, you mentioned millions of conversations, but it's beyond that. It's estimated of about 1 million people, right, who have kind of had at least some level of, suicidal ideational or conversation or, extreme personal struggle with AI. And as you point out, with ChatGPT, and as you point out, they didn't all get in that state because they're having these conversations with ChatGPT. Some of them may have, right? Some people say it's going to aggravate certain psychoses. But that means in our society, and most of the users are still in the West. We have 1 million people, or at least, who are having kind of suicidal thoughts. So that's kind of a societal problem. Iman Mustak actually talks about that in his book, where he talks about the massive wealth inequality that's being generated and how people are just kind of completely getting left out of the economy, right? Before we even get to AI displacement. And that's a challenge that we're facing. But it also brings up the second question. It's interesting. People are very critical of OpenAI, and we see some conversations where maybe they did encourage the person, right? This is all going to arguably get this is going to get resolved in court. I don't have the legal background to say whether they're liable or not, but people are putting some of the blame on them, right? But it's also like, oh, well, they're taking on a lot of responsibilities, which maybe they do or don't have, especially when people kind of create the conversation. They did hire these 175 mental health experts. They are trying. It kind of reminds me of like oh, when you're interacting with somebody, somebody has these thoughts and they share them with you, you feel kind of compelled to do something, even if you're not legally liable. And, we have these situations in schools, and there is some legal liability for that for when students say things. But,
Yeah.
these are, it's like now, well, you have a company that kind of has these, is taking on this responsibility. The last thing I'll say about it, I sent out a blog post about this morning on my Substack. It's like, okay, they don't just know about you as, people who are suicidal. I mean, you think about how much information people are sharing, rather about family, personal relationships, jobs, right? We used to kind of say, Google, right? They would kind of amass information based on your browsing history and all these things to sell you products, but you're basically telling them in many instances, everyone doesn't use it this way. I mostly use it for debate and AI, right? Everyone is all, 70, 800 million users aren't using it as a counselor, but even with them, you might just have a small conversation. Oh, I'm like trying to figure this out. Do you have any advice? And they're getting to know everybody. And then other people are like, oh, this is hype. This is all going to go away. It's like, if I knew everything or a lot of things or whatever, 70% of somebody's whole basic identity and who they were and all their thoughts and concerns in their life, even like 500 million people, I could make a lot of money with that on that alone, regardless of, whether I can create an AI engineer or, have replace a tutor or something like that, right? This
Well,
is
it's
a powerful amount of consumer data. Yeah.
and I would like you were saying, if you start with the assumption that Google 20 years ago had access because of what we were searching, social media expanded that greatly because you were looking at associations and the things you would like or not like or interact with. Now you're exponentially potentially increasing the amount of interaction that you're having with the algorithm and with the platform and sharing a lot more. It's not just being responsive in terms of responding to things on social media. You're generating interactions and sharing sometimes incredibly personal, confidential information, which we should always be very mindful of. But even if you're being mindful of it, there's going to be a lot that's shared, and we should be concerned about that. And I think in a future episode we'll get into this a little bit more, and it would be great to follow up on Stefan's Substack post about this, because we need to be thinking a little bit more about what is it that we're sharing, what we're allowing others to have access to, and what that's likely to lead to as we go forward. There's really no traditional sense of privacy anymore. And not only is that gone because it's kind of like we're in an airport all the time. When you're in an airport, you're being surveilled. Now the rest of society is feeling that way. And not only are we in that kind of environment, but we're also contributing to it with what we're sharing online. So, leaving you on a bright note, we're going to wrap it up there. Thanks, Stefan, for everything. We'll see you all next week with the next update on AI in higher ed and in society.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.